Right now you're listening to me on the Rode PodMic USB, which has the same sound profile as the original PodMic, the difference being, believe it or not, that it has USB functionality. In this case, I'm running it via XLR into the Rodecaster Duo behind me, and my goal today is to help guide you down the road to making your Rode PodMic sound its absolute best. This is my PodMic after I've added EQ and made a bit of a custom preset, but this is what it sounds like straight out of the box, and there's quite a difference in sound. The thing with the PodMic that I've learned over the years, because I bought the original when it was first released, at this point, I don't know, at least 5 years ago. And it was my first real microphone. I love the build quality. I love the design, but the sound quality tends to be, I think, a little bit harsh. It really emphasizes the high-end frequencies and really de-emphasizes the low ends. There are certain voices where the PodMic's natural sound just fits really well, but there are also a lot of other voices where it really does not, including my own. So that's why I like to add in a bit of EQ and help the PodMic sound its absolute best. And I will show you the steps that I've done to do that, and in a way where you can change them to suit your voice and your environment. Now, everything I'm going to show you applies to all of the PodMics, the PodMic USB and the original PodMic. And the settings that I'm going to show you are relevant for the Rodecaster Duo and the Rodecaster Pro II. There is the original Rodecaster right here that I have mine. Its interface and its EQ settings are a little bit different, and it doesn't have everything that the Rodecaster Pro II and the Duo have, but you can duofinitely try and mimic it at least somewhat. Additionally, PodMic USB, since this has the Rode Central functionality built into it, basically when you open up Rode Central and you go into the processing, it's kind of like having a Rodecaster on your computer. Not every setting in the Rodecaster is in Rode Central, but most of them are. So if you kind of go through this step-by-step thing, you'll see where some options just aren't there, but you can kind of fine-tune the other ones that are there. And if you're working at the Rodecaster, you also do have some presets, which are a good place to start. Additionally, you can also change the PodMic sound with Windscreens. So if I take this one, this is the Rode WS2. This is an older one that they've made, but it's really thick and foamy. If I put that on there without changing any EQ, you can hear how it really changed the mic's characteristics, because it kind of already eliminated some of those higher end frequencies. And I think that the PodMic already sounds better with me having done nothing else besides add on this windscreen. There are also other options as well. You can go to reporterstore.com, where I get most of my colored windscreens. I'm not associated with them in any way, by the way. They have PodMic ones now. So Peter Piper pitched a podcast, my plosive problem's taken care of, and this didn't change it quite as much as this one did, but it did change the sound of the microphone, again, without me having to do anything else. And if you buy the PodMic USB, it does come with Rode's sort of revamped windscreen. And if I put that on there, this is what it sounds like. Again, having all of this different material for my voice to travel through is changing the way that the microphone sounds. Rode sent me this, I don't know if it's an early release or what, but the PodMic windscreen, it's the same exact one as the one that comes with the PodMic USB, but this one is in blue, which blew my mind. So I can put that on there, and this is what that sounds like as well, which is normally how I do end up using the PodMic, partially because I like how it sounds and partially because I like how it looks, and I know that might be ridiculous. But while we're talking about EQ, I'm going to take all the windscreens and pop filters off so you just hear the microphone with nothing else. So now you're listening to me with some EQ and processing, but if I turn that off, this is just the PodMic sound straight out of the box, no effects and no processing. Now, one thing that's really cool about the Rodecaster Pro II and the Duo is that they do have a PodMic preset built in. So if I go ahead over here and turn that on, this is what the PodMic preset sounds like, and you can kind of hear it made some changes to the sound right away. It already sounds quite a bit better. And so this could be as far as you go. If this sounds good on your voice and your environment and that's what you like, you could just stop here and you're done. But if you want to dive in a little more granularly, let's do that. So if your Rodecaster or your Rode Central is showing this, where it's just depth, sparkle, and punch, you can then click on advanced to open up some of the more advanced options. And we're going to just start from top left and go down to bottom right. Top left is the high pass filter. This one, you want to pass on the high pass filter. What a high pass filter does is it lets high frequencies pass through the filter and low frequencies get stuck. Normally, that's a great thing to have because it reduces rumbling and noise, but with the PodMic, a microphone that already struggles on the low end and emphasizes the high end, I don't want to do anything that's going to emphasize the high end even more. So I just turn off the high pass filter completely. The next option, if we arrow over, is the de-esser, and this one is pretty huge. So I'm going to dial in the settings that I like, which I take the threshold. And by the way, if you didn't know, you can just tap on any of these and then turn the select wheel to do that. So I'm going to turn the threshold, keep it right about 12 o'clock right up there. The attack, I'm also going to bump up to about 12 o'clock. Now the ratio by default is at a 3-to-1 ratio. Again, you can kind of just play with this until it sounds good on your voice, but I feel like 3-to-1 is pretty good. And again, what the de-esser does is it takes away a lot of those sibilants and harsh sounds, things that the PodMic does tend to emphasize. So when it comes to the high pass filter, you want to pass, but when it comes to the de-esser, you want to say yes, sir, to the de-esser. Gain, especially on this, I don't add any gain right now. And frequency, I would frequently remind you to set to at least 5,000 with the PodMic. If I turn that down, it just doesn't quite sound as full, but if I bring it all the way up, you can sort of hear my voice sounds full, less full, more full, more full. There we go. And now it just sounds quite a bit better. You could go past 5,000, but I have just found that 5,000 is what makes things sound a little bit better. And so if I turn off the de-esser, this is what the PodMic sounds without the de-esser. And if I turn on the de-esser, this is sort of some of the things we've shaped. Basically, we're using all of these different EQ settings together to try to make a sound that we like. The next option over here is the noise gate. I have found that the noise gate on the Rodecaster Pro II and the Duo is great kind of out of the box. At least, you know, in an environment like mine, which is semi-okay in terms of sound treatment, I usually don't need to change much here, but depending on your environment, you might need to tinker with the noise gate a little bit until it sounds natural, or turn it off completely if you really don't want it. And now we go over to the compressor. This is a good one. I do have a whole separate video about compression, but basically whenever you're using a compressor, the ratio is one of the most important parts that's going to really affect the sound of it. And so if we turn this ratio up, you're going to kind of hear the sound get a little more compressed. And if we turn this ratio down, you're going to notice it sort of loses compression a bit. Normally, when I use a compressor, I like to turn it up almost to like a 3-to-1 ratio. And I think that usually sounds pretty good. But in this case, I actually want to turn the compressor down. I have been using a 1:8 ratio, or 1.8-to-1 ratio, I should say, on the PodMic. And I think this sounds a little better. If I turn off the compressor, this is what it sounds like. And if I turn on the compressor, this is what it sounds like. What a compressor does is it basically reduces the dynamic range in a signal. So the low lows and the high highs, it kind of evens them out a little bit, which makes things a little easier to listen to, especially when it comes to long form spoken word or something like this video or a podcast. The threshold is when the compressor will take hold, and you can sort of decide when you want the compressor to take hold. If I turn that down, things sound really weird. If I turn it all the way up, it's almost like the compressor's, I don't know, it's too active. So somewhere sort of around noon seems to work. Maybe a little bit more towards like 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock is where I've been putting things, at least with my voice on this microphone. Attack, I like attack kind of where it is, right at 11 o'clock. If you turn it up too much, I feel like it sounds a little distracting and unnatural. And if you turn it down, then, I mean, it sounds fine, honestly, too. But I've been putting it at 11 o'clock. Gain, since you're playing with the signal when it comes to a compressor, adding in a little gain to make up for some of the dynamic range that you're using can be helpful. In this case, the default is 2 decibels, and that seems to work great. So I'm just going to leave that there. Up next, we have the equalizer. This is one of the most important. This and the next one are some of the most important ones when it comes to the PodMic. The equalizer, if we turn this off and we just go to a flat line, this is the PodMic's natural sound. If I turn on the equalizer, now you can hear, this is sort of that default signal that they played with. You have lows, mids, and highs. The thing with the PodMic are the highs. So you have, for each of these settings, lows, mids, and highs, you have a bell and gain. The bell will let you fine tune which parts of the frequency spectrum you're adjusting, and the gain will then raise or lower that. So if we go to the high bell, and we go over to the higher end frequencies, and we turn those all the way up, this is sort of that, like, when I think of a PodMic, this is what I think of. This is not how it naturally sounds, but in my mind over the years, the exaggerated PodMic sound sounds like this. But we don't want to just get rid of all the highs, because then it's going to sound really muddy and strange. So we want to find, I think, a nice middle ground. If you just leave it flat, that kind of works too. You could potentially bump them up just a little bit. I kind of like to turn the highs down just a little bit with the PodMic and make it sound a little more full, just sort of get rid of some of that harshness. And then the mids and the mid gain, I think, are then something you can season to your own personal taste. And usually the mids kind of like to turn down a little bit. And with the PodMic on the lows, I like to kind of nudge it over to the left a little more and maybe boost the lows a little more than I would on a normal microphone. This is not how I would normally do the equalizer for a microphone. This is specifically how I approach EQing the PodMic. It's a little more aggressive than what I typically do, which is try to be as subtle as possible. So if I turn this off, now you can hear this is just the PodMic's default sound. And if I turn this back on, this is now me sort of taking out some of those highs and boosting some of those lows. And speaking of highs and lows, up next we have the exciter, the big bottom and the Aural exciter. One of these is great and one of them is not so great with the PodMic. The big bottom, again, you can just adjust all of these to your taste, but I like to change the tune dial. You can kind of play with this and see how it changes the sound just a little bit. I sort of like this kind of around 8 or 9 o'clock. And then the drive, this is like how intense it is. I kind of like the big bottom. If I take it all the way out, now you can kind of hear almost what it sounds like without it at all. If I go all the way, this is like distractingly low end. But if I put it maybe kind of around 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, which is about we'll say 70%, maybe 65 would be a little better. 64, 65%. I think that works for the big bottom. And then the Aural exciter, this is one that's going to normally boost the high end and give a real compressed radio-y sound, which is not what we want on the PodMic because it already kind of does that on its own. So what I do with the Aural exciter is I turn the harmonics down to like 10 o'clock. I sort of, instead of making it right now, you can hear how it sounds, I guess, very excitable. We want to tame that and turn that down to like 10 or 11 o'clock. And then tuning it, the frequency that it adjusts, I like that right about 12 o'clock. We could go down even more, but this sounds kind of muddy and weird. We could crank it all the way up, but this sounds a little too intense. So maybe like 12 or 1 o'clock is where I go with the Aural exciter. And the next option is just panning. We don't need to mess with panning at all. And that takes us back around to the high pass filter, which we already turned off. So now we started with the PodMic preset, and then we kind of seasoned it to taste based on my preferences and my specific voice. So if you just type in these numbers to your Rodecaster or your Rode Central, it might not be the exact same result because we have different voices. But if I go over here and I turn this off, now you can hear the PodMic, no effects, no processing, just what it sounds like, and then turn this on, and now we have this. Now, as soon as I switch this preset, this is gonna go away and we're gonna lose it. So let's make sure we go into presets and we add a new preset. We can call this one Tom PodMic and click done. And now I have that preset right there. I can go back to the one I made or switch between any others just by tapping them in the preset section right here. And there's the new PodMic one that we just made, which again, if I turn that off, this is what it sounds like with nothing. And if I turn that on, this is what it sounds like with that. And then if we pop on the windscreen, I think this is a much more usable and much less harsh sounding PodMic, something that actually sounds pretty awesome because these are really good microphones, especially the original. $99, super well built, but that sound quality sometimes it just leaves some things to be desired. So hopefully this will help you kind of dial in a sound that you like. I really do wish, and maybe I hope at some point, a feature that Rode might be able to add somehow is the ability to share presets, because this would have been very easy if I could just give you a link instead. You just download the preset and install it into your Rodecaster. We don't have that ability yet, so hopefully this helps walk you through some of that. And you can use this same basic idea of going through each of these things on any other microphone. We could get significantly more technical with audio processing instead of terms like 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, or whatever. But for now, we're just trying to quickly dial in a sound that sounds good so we can get to recording and making the things that we're excited to make. And speaking of things I'm excited about, thank you to everyone who helps support my channel through Patreon and YouTube channel memberships. And if you want to know a little bit more about audio production and processing and all that super fun stuff that I love, check out these videos right here.